For this video, I am going to be ranking the Beatles on film. Now, what I've done is I've taken the most substantial movies that involve the Beatles, whether they're the Beatles feature films, documentaries, or movies that were just made about the Beatles. I've taken them and I've whittled the list down to 11, and I'm going to be ranking them from my least favorite to my most favorite. So let's get started. Number 11, Around the Beatles. Around the Beatles was a 1964 television special featuring the Beatles. It was produced by Jack Good for ITV TV in London. It was taped in Wembley Park Studios in London in April of 1964, and it was broadcast in the UK on May 6, 1964, and in the US on the ABC network on November 15th. The show opens, the Beatles are doing a performance of Pyramus and Thisbe, which is from William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. Paul is Pyramus, John is his lover Thisbe, George is Moonshine, and Ringo is dressed up as a lion. There are performances by not only the Beatles, but also PJ Proby, Lon John Baldry, Sounds Incorporated, and Cilla Black. The Beatles had pre-recorded their songs at London's IBC studios on April 19th. And one of the more interesting songs that's featured is there, not only is there a medley of some of their early songs, but there's also a version of the Isley Brothers' Shout, with the Beatles taking turns on vocals. And that is the only recorded version that exists of the Beatles actually performing that song. So it's interesting alone just for that fact. There is a bootleg copy of the Pyramus and Thisbe segment of this show that's available on video cassette and DVD. It's on the Fun with the Fab Four video, which was produced by Media Home Entertainment. The Beatles' mime performances of their songs was released on video in 1985 by Dick Clark Studios, and it was called The Beatles Live. The film is fun, but it's brief. Overall, it's enjoyable, even though the performances are lip-synced. It's something to check out. It's just not my favorite movie featuring the Beatles. Number 10, The Beatles at Shea Stadium. The Beatles at Shea Stadium, you've probably seen most of it in the Anthology, or Ron Howard's documentary, 8 Days a Week, has 30 minutes of it featured there. But basically, the movie itself, the movie The Beatles at Shea Stadium, is the Beatles arriving in New York. It shows them backstage, kind of goofing around before the concert. These are intercut with scenes of the fans flipping out. And then there is the actual concert of Shea Stadium. There are 14 cameras that were used to capture the Beatles' performance and also the reactions of the crowd. So you get a number of different angles, you get close-ups of the Beatles, you get to see a real intimate view of them on stage performing. The documentary first aired on the BBC One on March 1st, 1966, and it wasn't released in the United States on ABC until January 10th of 1967. It's one of the few live concert performances that exist of the Beatles filmed in color, so it has value just from that standpoint. It's never been made commercially available, although a good portion of the film is included, like I say, in the Anthology and 8 Days a Week. There are some re-restored versions of the film that you might be able to locate on bootleg that have the raw version of the recording, but good luck finding that. Number 9 is Yellow Submarine. Now, apart from composing and performing the songs in this movie, the Beatles themselves really participate only in the final scene of the film that leads into the closing credits. Their cartoon characters were voiced by other actors. They do provide the music in the film. They really hoped that this film would satisfy their 3-picture contract to United Artists, but United Artists did not accept that and said, no, you still owe us another film. But even so, it's an enjoyable film. The animation is dazzling. The song selection is great. I only rank this near the bottom of my list just because the real Beatles don't really have much involvement in it. Number 8, The Complete Beatles. The Complete Beatles is a 2-hour documentary which chronicles the career of the Beatles. It was directed by Patrick Montgomery and produced by Delilah Films Electronic Arts Pictures, and it's narrated by actor Malcolm McDowell. The film was initially released in 1982 as a PBS documentary in the U.S. and then on VHS, Betamax, and Laserdisc that same year on MGM United Artists Home Video. But it got such a good response that they actually released it theatrically by MGM and United Artists in 1984. I actually saw it in the theater when it came out, so that's one of my earliest memorable Beatle film experiences. For many years, this was regarded as the definitive film about the Beatles. And really, it's still the most concise, comprehensive documentary of the Beatles just because the anthology is so long. If you want just a real hour and a half film about the Beatles, showing some cool footage, some great interviews, and a little bit of analysis of the making of the Beatles albums and films, I really recommend you check this out. It is a very entertaining film. Obviously, it's been surpassed by the anthology and to some extent 8 Days a Week, but it's still a really enjoyable film. The only reason you're not going to be able to ever probably get this on DVD is that Paul McCartney bought the rights to this film right before Anthology came out, and he blocked the release of this so it would not compete with Anthology. Number 7, Magical Mystery Tour. Magical Mystery Tour was the Beatles' third film. It was the brainchild of Paul McCartney. It was directed by all 4 Beatles collectively, and good luck identifying any kind of a plot in this movie. Now, there is some kind of narrative between Ringo and his fictional Aunt Jessie. There's the magicians who are supposed to be weaving various spells. Now, the 4 magicians are actually the Beatles and their road manager, Mel Evans. But there's not really magic of any kind that happens. They drive around. There's a meaningless car race. There is a segment at a strip club. There's a segment at what is never explained but seems to be some kind of military base. There's Victor Spinetti there talking very fast, some kind of militaristic gibberish. It's just all very incoherent. There's not a plot. There's some musical sequences woven in between all of the nonsensical stuff that happens, which are entertaining. There's I Am the Walrus, Blue Jay Way. Paul is featured roaming around, I think it's the French countryside for the Fool in the Hills sequence. And then at the very end of the movie, the Beatles are in white tuxedos descending a staircase as these glamorous dancers swirl around them for the climax of the movie to the tune of Your Mother Should Know. But really, it's very much a do-it-yourself filmmaking experience at our expense. If you are not a diehard Beatles fan, I do not recommend you check this out. You will be very angry that you wasted 60 minutes on this movie. Now, speaking as a diehard Beatles fan, I can say that I do enjoy most of the film. I appreciate it for the bizarre mess that it is. It does help if you are on some mind-altering substances, I would imagine. But other than that, it's not a real great, enjoyable film if you're expecting it to be another Hard Day's Night or Help. Number 6, Let It Be. This was the Beatles' final major feature film. It was the movie that they intended to be a television special and then said, hey, we owe United Artists another feature film. Let's blow it up to feature film size and release it theatrically. So what we have here is the Beatles rehearsing and recording songs for what's never explained, but what is their next studio album. And then suddenly they shift locations from Twickenham Film Studio to the Apple offices. Suddenly Billy Preston is there. We don't know why. And then they have a rooftop concert, and there's not much lead into that. My main problem with this film is that if you don't know the history of the Beatles, you really have no way of following this film. It just seems like a random collection of film of the Beatles rehearsing, recording, performing, and then there's a concert at the end. There's not any continuity there, and it can be very confusing if you're not a Beatles fan and you're just watching it, because there's nothing to tie it together. There's no narration, there's no title cards, there's nothing that moves the movie along so you understand what's happening. And that's where I think Michael Lindsay Hogg really dropped the ball on this, because he could have made a more coherent film. He could have made this more enjoyable by explaining what was happening so you understood the context of it all. Hopefully, Peter Jackson's film rectifies the situation, but until then, Let It Be is my number 6 pick. Number 5, What's Happening? The Beatles in the USA, otherwise known as the Beatles' first U.S. visit. This was filmed by Albert and David Maysles during the Beatles' first trip to America in February of 1964. It was first released on video in 1991, titled The Beatles' First U.S. Visit, and it's now also available on DVD with that title. So this follows the Beatles as they travel to New York City, Washington, and Miami Beach. The 1991 version, and every version since then, includes the Ed Sullivan performances. Those were not part of the original What's Happening documentary. They actually had some footage of Brian Epstein, some interviews with him that was cut out of the version that was released on VHS and DVD. I think the Ed Sullivan footage definitely adds more, because that's more musical performances of the Beatles. You get the Washington, D.C. concert, which is a bonus, and you get some fly-on-the-wall footage of them in their hotel room and traveling between cities. That's amusing. You get them recording some radio promos for the New York radio stations, and also some of the stations back in Britain. So it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy this film a lot. It reminds me a lot of Bob Dylan's movie Don't Look Back, which was filmed on his 1965 tour. That was also very much an audio verite style film. It's enjoyable just to be a spectator on what was a very exciting time, not only for the fans, but also, I imagine, for the Beatles, getting swept up in the whole tide of Beatlemania. It really is an entertaining film, and it's worth checking out, absolutely. Whether you're a diehard Beatle fan or if you're just interested in seeing a great documentary about the Beatles. Number 4, Help. Help was the Beatles' second feature film. It was the second one directed by Richard Lester. It stars the Beatles, Eleanor Bron, Leo McKern, Victor Spinetti, and Roy Kinnear. So the plot of Help involves the Beatles trying to record their new album and also trying to protect Ringo, because there's this sinister Eastern cult and also a duo of mad scientists who are obsessed with obtaining this sacrificial ring that Ringo received from a fan. So they move around to different locations. They go to Salisbury Plain, the Bahamas, Salzburg, and the Austrian Alps. And it's meant to be a spoof of the James Bond films. It's entertaining for the most part, but I just find it less engaging and interesting than A Hard Day's Night. The film, you can really tell that it feels scripted, and it just seems the Beatles aren't having as much fun. They really seem swallowed up by the exotic locations they're filming in, and there's not a whole lot of opportunity for their individual personalities to show through like it does in A Hard Day's Night. Number 3, 8 Days a Week. So yes, 8 Days a Week is the 2016 documentary film directed by Ron Howard about the Beatles' career as a touring band from 1962 to 1966. And this was produced with the cooperation of Paul, Ringo, Yoko, and Olivia Harrison. And it very cool because it features a lot of never before seen handheld footage that was taken at a lot of the concerts that they performed between those years, 1962 to 1966. And some of the footage that we have seen in films previous, like the Washington, D.C. footage, for instance, was actually colorized by Ron Howard, and it looks actually amazing. It doesn't look too bad. Most colorized stuff that I see looks like crap, but this stuff actually looks pretty good. Now, they've got interviews with different celebrities like Whoopi Goldberg, and Paul and Ringo also do interviews, but it's just very exciting to watch, and really one of the best documentaries I've seen made on the Beatles. And only surpassed, as far as documentaries go, by my number 2 selection, which is the Beatles Anthology. So the Beatles Anthology, as you probably know, was the documentary television series. It covers the career of the Beatles from their earliest beginnings to their breakup. It was broadcast in the UK in 6 parts between November 26th and December 31st, 1995. And in the US, it was chopped up into 3 feature-length episodes on ABC television between November 9th and the 23rd of November, 1995. It was actually, if I'm remembering right, they aired it the week of Thanksgiving, which was very cool. They released it with additional content as an 8-volume VHS set and also an 8-disc Laserdisc set on September 5th, 1996. And it was finally released on DVD in 2003, and it included a bonus disc with 81 minutes of special features. Now, this movie was originally conceived as early as 1970. It was originally going to be titled The Long and Winding Road, even up to the point where they actually started taking it seriously in the 90s. And then George said he didn't want the documentary to be titled after a Paul song, so they renamed it The Beatles Anthology. And it is definitely the most comprehensive chronicle of the Beatles' entire history, and there is a wealth of rare television performances, archival interviews, behind-the-scenes studio footage, and contemporary interviews with the surviving Beatles. It's very breathtaking in scope, and it's also very unlikely that it's going to be surpassed as the most exhaustive document of the Beatles' career and the Beatles' legacy. The only negative about it is a very long documentary. You should be prepared to invest about 8 hours watching this monster of a documentary. And if you're just a casual Beatles fan, you probably don't have the patience for that. But it is the first and last word on everything to do with the Beatles. Definitely check the anthology out. And my number 1 favorite Beatles film of all time is A Hard Day's Night. Number 1, it was their first feature film. It was directed by Richard Lester and released by United Artists. It was shot in black and white, and it is a fictionalized snapshot of a typical day in the life of the Beatles on tour. This film did, or at least it went a long way towards establishing the individual personas of the Beatles. You got John as the smart Beatle, Paul as the cute Beatle, George as the quiet one, and then you've got Ringo playing the part of the affable clown. And it's really enjoyable from start to finish. Even though it's scripted, it's still, the Beatles' individual personality and humor really shines through. The musical segments are stylish, the whole movie is fun and entertaining, and it's just a feel-good exercise that showcases the warmth and the vibrancy of the early Beatles. This is, for me, my favorite of all Beatles films and the one that I watch the most. So, feel free to disagree with me or, post in the comments if you've got a different order or you think there's films that should have been included. I will entertain those arguments. And, I really enjoy the discussion back and forth. What are your favorite movies? What do you think about this movie? What do you think about that movie? So, nonetheless, let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and Happy New Year.